The subway roared like a living creature beneath Manhattan's frozen streets. It was the winter of 1987, and the third line carried a rhythm of its own. Metal clashing, lights flickering, and lives brushing past without ever really touching. That night, as the city drowned in a snowstorm, a young woman sat with a sketchbook on her knees. Her name was Claire, a street artist who painted faces of strangers she could never afford to know. Her gloved fingers were smudged with charcoal, her coat torn at the sleeve, and her headphones hummed a faint tune of The Smiths, a soundtrack to her quiet rebellion against the world. Across from her sat Evan, a man who didn't belong to the underground. His suit was too clean, his briefcase too polished, and his gaze too tired for someone his age. He worked in a tall glass building that scraped the clouds, crunching numbers for people whose names he'd never meet. Every night, he took the same train home, always at 7:23, always on line 3, always pretending not to see the girl who drew him week after week. When the train screeched to a sudden halt between stations, the lights flickered and died. Silence spread through the metal tunnel, followed by nervous laughter and muffled curses. Then came the voice, soft, trembling, curious. "Do you ever draw me?" Evan asked in the dark. Claire smiled, unseen, her breath a small cloud in the cold air. "Only when you look the other way," she whispered. Outside, the storm raged above ground, but inside the stalled train, something rare began to bloom. The sound of two strangers realizing they had been orbiting each other for far too long. Before we begin, if this story finds a place in you, if you still believe that love can come back even after everything, hit like, subscribe, and comment the city and state you're watching from. That's how I know where these stories are finding their way. The winter of 1987 was one of the coldest New York had ever seen. Streets glazed in ice, the air filled with the scent of burnt pretzels and diesel, and strangers walked faster than their shadows. The subway had become more than transport. It was an artery, pulsing beneath the heart of a restless city. Each night, its tunnels whispered thousands of unfinished stories, and among them was one that neither Claire nor Evan ever expected to live. Claire spent her nights painting portraits on cardboard near Union Square. The city was cruel to dreamers, but her art gave her something the world could not take: hope. She carried her sketchbook everywhere, drawing faces before they vanished into the crowd. That was how she noticed Evan, the man in the grey suit with the same seat, the same silence, and the same haunted expression. She had drawn him at least 20 times without him ever knowing, capturing a loneliness that mirrors her own. Evan, on the other hand, lived in the world of deadlines and fluorescent lights. His father had built his path before he could walk it: law school, firm, future, all wrapped in iron expectations. But each night, as the train rocked him home, his eyes found that same girl with ink-stained fingers and defiant eyes. She was everything he had been taught to avoid: unpredictable, alive, free. When the snowstorm hit and Line 3 froze in the dark, it was as if the city itself had decided to lock them together long enough to break their patterns. And in that stillness, under the hum of dying lights, two worlds collided, not with noise, but with recognition. It wasn't destiny, it was timing, the kind that only happens once. The snow kept falling like ash over the city that night. The streets around Canal Street were nearly empty, except for the scraping sound of shovels and the rare cab that dared to crawl through the frost. Claire had been out since dawn, selling portraits for $5 apiece near the entrance of the subway. She drew faces quickly: lovers, drunks, old women, anyone who stopped long enough to breathe near her stand. Her gloves were thin, her fingers numb, but her spirit burned quietly. To her, New York was both cruel and kind, a place that bruised her daily, yet kept her dreaming. When she packed her pencils, she counted her coins and smiled, just enough for a cup of coffee and a train ride home. Down the stairs, the warmth of the underground hit her like a heartbeat. The familiar noise, the rumble, the voices, the smell of metal and wet wool. It was the sound of survival. She stepped onto Line 3, the same car she took every evening, the same bench where she always sat. And there he was, Evan, the man who looked like he belonged somewhere else entirely. The briefcase on his lap, the coat folded perfectly beside him, and eyes lost in a world no one could touch. He read the same paper every night, folding and refolding it with precision, as if repetition could keep chaos away. She didn't know why she drew him. Maybe because he was the only thing still in focus when everything else blurred. The train lurched forward. She took out her sketchbook. Her pencil danced. Evan felt her gaze before he saw it. When their eyes met, something in him faltered. Just a fraction, like a skipped note in a familiar song. The intercom crackled. Due to the storm, all service on Line 3 will experience significant delays. People groaned. Claire smiled faintly. To her, time slowing down wasn't a problem. It was a gift. Evan adjusted his tie, pretending to read, but he could feel it, her eyes tracing the shape of his face, the line of his jaw, the quiet sadness he thought he hid so well. No one ever looked at him like that. Not since Margaret left, not since the world became a checklist. When the lights flickered, Claire leaned forward. "You look like someone who hates where he's going," she said softly. He hesitated, caught between annoyance and surprise. "You draw strangers often?" he asked. Her lips curved. "Only the ones who pretend not to exist." The car swayed again, harder this time. A metallic shriek filled the tunnel as the brakes screamed. The lights died. Gasps echoed. The city above was collapsing into snow, and below it, Line 3 stopped breathing. For a moment, there was only the hum of silence. Then a lighter clicked, a small flame trembling in the dark. Claire held it close, her face half lit, eyes golden against the black. "Guess we're stuck," she whispered. Evan exhaled slowly, his breath a cloud. "Seems that way." She handed him the lighter. "Your turn. You look like a man who needs a little fire." He took it, unsure whether to laugh or thank her. He hadn't smiled in months, but something in her presence disarmed him, like a familiar song he'd forgotten he loved. Outside the tunnel, the blizzard thickened, cutting power through half the city. Inside, two strangers began to talk about everything that didn't matter. Favorite bands, bad coffee, the smell of paint. The conversation flowed like warmth through cold metal. Claire told him she'd left home at 16. That art was the only thing that never lied to her. Evan told her he'd inherited a job, not a life, that he had learned to live in other people's definitions of success. The train became their confessional. When service finally resumed 2 hours later, she tore a page from her sketchbook, his face, half finished, half true, and handed it to him. "But when you forget who you are," she said. Then she disappeared into the crowd at Times Square, leaving him with graphite on his fingertips and a feeling he couldn't name. That night, Evan stood by his apartment window, staring at the snow piling against the glass. The city was quieter than usual. He looked down at the drawing again. She had captured something he didn't know was visible, the part of him still alive. He folded the sketch carefully and slid it inside his briefcase, between contracts and invoices, as if hiding a secret the world wasn't ready to see. But from that night on, every time the clock hit 7:23, he took Line 3 again, hoping, without admitting, to find her there. The next evening, the city had thawed just enough to move again. Trains crawled through half-cleared tunnels, their wheels shrieking against ice and rust. Evan left the office early. His co-workers thought it strange, the man who never missed a meeting suddenly disappearing before dusk. He told no one where he was going, not even himself. The truth was simpler. He wanted to see if fate believed in second chances. When he stepped into Line 3, she was already there. Claire sat near the window, sketchbook open, her curls falling loosely over her scarf. A streak of charcoal crossed her cheek, like war paint against the monotony of the world. She didn't look up right away. She never did. Instead, she traced the outline of a stranger until the familiar rhythm of shoes, briefcase, and silence made her pause. Evan hesitated before sitting across from her again. The seat between them felt like a border and a bridge at once. He cleared his throat, unsure of what to say. "Do you always draw the same people?" he asked. Claire smiled faintly. "Only when I can't stop thinking about them." That answer hung in the air longer than either expected. The train rattled through the tunnels, scattering reflections across the window glass. For a moment, they saw each other doubled, two faces layered over the passing darkness. Days turned into weeks, and Line 3 became their meeting place. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But even in silence, the city around them blurred, as if the universe slowed whenever they shared that small metal space. Evan began bringing her coffee. Black, no sugar, just as she liked. Claire started sketching in ink instead of charcoal, claiming the permanence made her nervous in a good way. One night, she handed him a page torn from her book. It wasn't a portrait. It was a skyline, half real, half imagined. "That's the view I'll have someday," she said. "From my studio." He looked at it carefully, tracing the outline of fire escapes and antennas drawn from memory. "And what's missing?" he asked. She shrugged. "The light. It only turns on when I stop doubting myself." He laughed softly, and something inside him cracked open. The version of himself that lived for deadlines began to fade. He found himself listening to music again, reading poetry, even missing trains on purpose. Claire's presence had turned the routine into rhythm, the kind of rhythm that made life less predictable, more alive. But outside the tunnels, their worlds still waited. Evan's father called every Sunday, asking when he'd take over the family firm completely. Claire's landlord threatened eviction if she didn't pay the rent. Reality pressed on both of them like gravity, silent, heavy, relentless. One night, after a long week of late hours and broken sleep, Evan didn't show up. The bench across from Claire stayed empty, and the noise of the train felt sharper, colder. She told herself it didn't matter. People in this city vanished all the time, into jobs, into streets, into versions of themselves they could no longer recognize. But the next day, when the doors opened at 7th Avenue, there he was again, hair disheveled, eyes tired, holding a folded paper bag. "You left your lighter," he said, handing her the small silver flame from the night they first spoke. She blinked, surprised. "You kept it?" He nodded. "It reminded me I was human." For the first time, she didn't draw. She just looked at him, really looked, and realized she didn't know a single thing about his life, not even his last name. Yet somehow, she knew his heart better than anyone above ground. As winter turned into early spring, Line 3 carried them through the changing city. Posters for concerts replaced warnings about blackouts. Street vendors returned to the corners. The snow melted, revealing months of forgotten footsteps. And with each ride, the silence between them grew warmer, steadier, more dangerous. One Friday, Evan found the courage to ask, "What do you do when the train stops for good?" Claire tilted her head. "Find another line." That night, when she stepped off at her station, he followed for the first time. The streets were quiet, the air damp with rain. She led him past shuttered stores to a narrow alley filled with graffiti. "Welcome to my gallery," she said. The walls were covered with faces, hundreds of them, drawn with charcoal, ink and rain. Some were strangers, some were lost friends, and a few, unmistakably, were him. Evan stared at the mural, stunned. "You've been drawing me for months," Claire smiled. "You were the only one who didn't disappear." He stepped closer, the distance between them melting like snow. But before words could form, the rumble of another train echoed in the distance, a reminder that the city was always moving, even when hearts wanted to stay still. That night ended without a kiss, without promises, only a quiet understanding that something irreversible had begun. When Evan returned home, he placed her drawing beside the one she'd given him before. Two fragments of a story still unfolding, still unsure of its ending. He didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in years, he didn't need to. The waiting had become enough. The spring of 1988 came with a strange kind of warmth, the kind that melts snow but leaves the cold inside untouched. New York was changing again. Street musicians returned to the corners, and the subways were filled with chatter instead of silence. But for Claire and Evan, Line 3 had become more than a routine. It was a pulse, a secret rhythm beneath the city's noise. Evan no longer took the train because he had to. He took it because she was there. Each evening, as the clock struck 7:23, he would descend the steps of the subway, the air thick with iron and heat, and find her in the same seat. She always smiled without words, and that alone felt enough to undo a lifetime of restraint. One evening, she handed him a flyer, hand-drawn, folded in half. "Art show next week," she said. "A real one this time. I borrowed a cafe wall in the village." Evan read it, tracing her name written in ink at the bottom. "You finally did it." Claire laughed softly. "No, I finally stopped waiting for someone to tell me I could." He promised he'd be there. and for the first time, she believed him. The night of the show, rain fell like liquid glass. Evan arrived late, his tie undone, briefcase soaked. Inside, the cafe smelled of coffee and turpentine. Paintings hung on brick walls, color, chaos, and dreams stitched into paper. People whispered names he didn't know. But in the corner stood Claire, nervous and alive, her charcoal-stained fingers clutching a plastic cup of wine. When she saw him, her eyes lit up like the city after a blackout. "You came," she said. "You doubted?" he asked. They stood there, the crowd dissolving around them. On the wall behind her hung a portrait, his face captured in grayscale, not smiling, not frowning, just existing. Beneath it, a small label read, "Man on line 3." He felt something inside him collapse and rebuild all at once. "You put me on a wall." Claire looked up. "You put yourself there. I just made it visible." That night, after the show, they walked together through Washington Square. The fountain had been turned off for the season, and the arch loomed white against the sky. Claire told him she had received an offer, a chance to travel to Chicago to work with a small art collective. It wasn't much money, but it was a future. "I haven't said yes yet," she murmured. "New York still feels unfinished." Evan looked at her, torn between pride and panic. "You should go," he said, but his voice betrayed the truth. He didn't want her to. She stopped, studying him carefully. "You sound like someone who's already decided to disappear." He tried to smile. "Maybe I already did, long before I met you." They parted that night, without plans, without promises. The air between them hummed with everything unsaid. The next morning, Evan's father called. "The senior partner retires next month," he said. "It's time you take your place." Those words landed like chains. That evening, Evan didn't take the train. For the first time in months, Lean 3 carried only her. Claire sat alone, staring at the seat where he should have been. The city outside blurred through the window, lights smearing into gold and blue. She tried to draw, but her hand trembled. The sketch that emerged wasn't of him. It was of an empty seat, a cup of coffee cooling beside it, a window without reflection. 3 nights passed before he returned. When he did, she didn't speak right away. He sat down across from her, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. "So did I," he said quietly. The train rattled through the tunnels. Words finally found him. "They offered me a promotion," he said. "Corner office, double the pay." Claire looked at him, waiting. "And?" He exhaled, long and tired. "It feels like a door closing." She took his hand then, the first time skin met skin. It wasn't a grand gesture, just fingers brushing lightly against each other. But in that brief touch, everything changed. The noise of the train faded. The world outside ceased to exist. "Doors close," she whispered. "Trains don't stop forever." For the first time, he leaned toward her. "What if this one does?" She smiled sadly. "Then we walk." That night, he kissed her, softly, hesitantly, like someone discovering language for the first time. The train slowed as if the city itself were holding its breath. When the doors opened at their station, neither moved. But life, relentless as it was, would not let them stay in that suspended moment. The following week, Claire's landlord locked her studio for unpaid rent. She packed her art into boxes and left them with a friend. Evan, trapped between obligation and desire, began staying later at work, convincing himself it was temporary. The distance between stations grew wider. Some nights she skipped the train. Some nights he did. The silence that once connected them now separated them. Then came the letter. A simple envelope slipped under his office door. Inside, a sketch. 2 figures standing on a platform, holding hands, their faces turned away. At the bottom, a single line in her handwriting. "Sometimes love is the train, not the destination." He read it 3 times before realizing she was gone. The cafe had closed, her phone disconnected. Chicago, he remembered. She had chosen movement, and he had stayed still. For weeks, he rode line 3 anyway, half expecting her to appear again, half fearing she never would. The seat across from him remained empty, yet somehow alive. He began sketching in the margins of his legal pads, lines, faces, pieces of her. The man who had once measured life in contracts now counted days by memory. One night, as the train slowed near Canal Street, he noticed something on the wall outside the window. Graffiti newly painted, barely dry. 4 words in looping black letters. Keep drawing your way. He smiled for the first time in months. By the time the summer of 1989 rolled across Manhattan, the city had forgotten its own winter. Steam rose from sewer grates. Radios blared Madonna through open windows, and the scent of hot asphalt mixed with the salt of the Hudson. But Evan never forgot. Every time he descended into the subway, the walls seemed to breathe the same memory. The sound of pencils scratching, the faint smell of charcoal, the warmth of a stranger who once knew his name without needing to ask. He was no longer the man he had been a year ago. The promotion had come and gone, leaving him hollow. The corner office was filled with silence, not success. He still took line 3, even when he had no reason to. Sometimes he rode it in loops, from end to end, staring at the tunnels until they blurred into a kind of heartbeat. The world above had moved on, but the one below was still haunted by her ghost. Then, one Friday evening, the air shifted. A poster caught his eye at the station. Bold black letters against white paper. Art for the Underground, featuring local artists, Union Square. At the bottom, in a smaller script that trembled like handwriting. Curated by Claire Harlow. He read it twice before his breath caught. Claire. After a year of absence, she was back in New York. He left work early that night, walking through the city as if following an old map drawn by memory. Union Square was alive with sound and color. Paintings lined the walls, music played from small radios, and strangers moved like currents. And then he saw her. Claire stood under a string of flickering bulbs, older somehow, the lines of her face sharper, her confidence quieter. She wore a denim jacket speckled with dried paint, and a silver ring on a chain around her neck, the same lighter he'd once handed her, now repurposed into memory. He didn't call out. He just stood there, watching as she greeted people, laughed, and moved with the ease of someone who had finally found her rhythm. When she turned and saw him, the crowd around them seemed to fade. Her smile was slow, hesitant, but real. "You came back," she said. "Maybe I never left," he replied. They walked together through the maze of art, stopping in front of a canvas that stopped his heart. It was the subway, line 3, painted in deep shades of grey and blue. 2 figures sat across from each other, one sketching, one staring, their faces half lost in shadow. Beneath it, the title, "The Distance Between Stations." He traced the edge of the frame, his throat tight. "That's us." She nodded. "It was never finished. I didn't know how it ended." "And now?" he asked. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it doesn't." They spent hours talking. About the year apart, about Chicago, about the people they had become. She had painted murals across cities, lived out of suitcases, and learned to sleep beside train tracks. He had learned how to exist without really living. When the crowd began to thin, she packed her things slowly, as if afraid movement might break the spell. "Do you still ride line 3? She asked. "Every night," he said. "Some part of me hoped you would too." She laughed softly. "Maybe we've been on different trains heading to the same place." The city lights shimmered as they walked toward the station. Down the steps, the familiar hum of the underground welcomed them like an old song. The platform was nearly empty, just the 2 of them and the echo of distant wheels. When the train arrived, they boarded together, sitting in the same seats they once had. For a while, neither spoke. The years between them filled the silence like fog. Then Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a small sketchbook. "I started something on the way here," she said, handing it to him. Inside, on the first page, was a drawing of 2 hands reaching toward each other, but not yet touching. "Finish it," she said. He took her pencil, hesitating. His fingers brushed hers. Slowly, he drew the missing line, a connection between them. She watched quietly, tears forming behind her calm smile. "You always were afraid of endings," she murmured. "Maybe because I wanted one that lasted," he said. The train slowed. The city outside was still awake, but in that moment, it felt like it belonged to them alone. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Evan," she whispered, "I'm not staying forever." He closed his eyes. "Neither am I." But neither moved when the doors opened. The train kept running, its metal heart carrying them through darkness and light, through memory and renewal. When dawn broke over the city, they parted again, not in despair this time, but in peace. Claire pressed the sketchbook into his hands. "Keep it," she said. "Add what you need. Leave what you don't." He wanted to ask when he would see her again, but she shook her head gently. "If the world is kind, we'll find the same station twice." She stepped off into the morning, disappearing into the crowd like smoke into light. Evan sat still, the sketchbook warm in his hands. As the train rolled forward, he opened it again, and on the last page, in faint graphite, she had already written one final sentence. "Love doesn't vanish. It changes trains." The winter of 1990 drifted into New York like a ghost that refused to leave. Snow layered the rooftops, muffling sirens and horns, and the streets once again turned silver under the streetlights. Time had passed, but Line 3 still ran, steady as breath, carrying new faces and old stories. Evan was one of them, a man older now, his hair touched with grey, his briefcase replaced by a worn leather satchel that carried nothing but papers, pencils, and a single sketchbook filled with drawings that no one else had seen. He had left the firm 2 years earlier, quietly, without ceremony. The city no longer demanded the same things from him. It simply watched him fade into its rhythm. He taught art classes in the evenings at a community centre, children learning how to turn chaos into colour. He never told them about Claire, but sometimes, when they asked what love looked like, he would say, "It looks like something unfinished." Line 3 had become his chapel. Each night he rode it, not searching anymore, just remembering. Every tunnel whispered echoes of her laugh. Every seat held the ghost of a conversation. The sketchbook she'd left him was nearly full now, not with portraits, but with moments. A woman with paint on her fingers, a man holding a lighter, 2 hands, almost touching, suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Then, one night, as snow thickened against the glass again, he saw her. It was impossible, and yet there she was, Claire, sitting by the window, older too, her curls shorter, her clothes flecked with paint. The silver lighter still hung from her neck, its metal dulled with years. She was reading, the same way she once drew, completely consumed, unaware of the world around her. For a moment, Evan thought he was dreaming. The train swayed, the lights flickered, and she looked up. Their eyes met, and time folded in on itself. No words, no surprise, just recognition, quiet, steady, inevitable. She smiled first. "You kept riding." He nodded. "You came back." They laughed softly, the sound swallowed by the rhythm of the wheels. The train rattled on through darkness, and neither spoke for several minutes. It felt as if they'd never stopped talking. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was low, careful. "I've been painting schools, murals, kids, dreams, colour. The kind of work that doesn't pay, but matters." Evan smiled. "I've been teaching. Same thing." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw that the man before her wasn't the one she'd left. He was gentler now, quieter, a man who had made peace with waiting. He reached into his bag and pulled out her sketchbook. The edges were frayed, the pages smudged, but her first drawing was still there, 2 hands reaching toward each other. On the opposite page, he had drawn something new, a subway car filled with light, the hands finally touching, the connection complete. Claire's breath caught. "You finished it." He nodded. "I had to see how it looked." The train slowed as it neared Times Square, the same place they had first parted years ago. Claire closed the sketchbook carefully. "You know," she said softly, "I never stopped painting you. You're on walls in 3 cities now, but you're always sitting in the same place right across from me, waiting." He chuckled quietly. "Maybe I was." The train stopped. The doors opened and the air rushed in, cold, sharp, familiar. She stood, hesitated, then reached out her hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's see if the city still remembers us." They stepped out together into the station. The tiles were cleaner now, the graffiti gone, but the ghosts remained. Evan looked around and smiled. "It feels smaller," he said. Claire nodded. "Maybe we just grew." Outside, the city was alive again. Neon signs reflected in puddles, steam rising from grates, the noise of a place that never truly sleeps. They walked side by side through the snow, past the same coffee stand where she used to draw strangers, past the same stairway where he had once hesitated to speak. At the corner, she stopped and turned to him. "Do you think we ever really lost each other?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No," he said. "We were just waiting for the same train to come back." She smiled then, that same quiet smile from years before. "And what happens now?" He laughed softly. "Maybe we finally get off." That night, they sat in a small diner near the station, steam fogging the windows. They didn't talk about years lost or futures promised. They just talked. About art, about life, about the noise of the city that had carried them both through love and loneliness. When the lights dimmed and the snow began to fall harder, she reached across the table and took his hand. It felt the same, maybe a little older, but still the same. Evan whispered, "You were right." "About what?" she asked. He smiled. "Love doesn't vanish. It just changes trains." She squeezed his hand gently. "Then let's stay on this one for a while." The city outside moved on. The subway ran beneath them, steady and endless, carrying stories through its veins. Somewhere between past and present, between art and survival, two souls who had once met by accident found their way home again. Not because fate demanded it, but because they never truly stopped moving toward each other. And as dawn rose over the skyline, the trains began their first runs of the morning, humming softly through the tunnels. Line 3, the same old line, still carried love stories no one else would ever know. Years later, long after the tunnels had been repainted and the old subway cars retired, the legend of Line 3 still lingered like a whisper beneath New York's skin. People said that sometimes, late at night, if the train slowed between stations, you could hear the faint scratch of a pencil, or see two figures reflected in the dark window, a man with grey at his temples and a woman with paint on her hands, sitting across from each other as if time itself had never learned to move them apart. Claire and Evan never became famous, but their art lived quietly through the city. Her murals adorned the forgotten walls of schools and bridges, each one carrying traces of faces she once drew in subway light. His sketches hung in corners of small cafes, signed only with a single line, "For the one who never stopped looking back." They grew older together without the need for grand gestures. Some nights they still rode the train, side by side, their silence softer than words. The city changed, taller, faster, louder, but Line 3 remained the same. It still trembled with the rhythm of human hearts, still carried those who dreamed in motion. One winter, as snow began to fall again, Evan left his sketchbook on a bench inside the train, open to the final page. It showed the same two hands that had started everything, still touching, still alive. Above them, he had written, "Some loves never arrive on time. They simply never stop traveling." When the train doors closed and the world outside blurred into motion, it was as if the city exhaled, remembering that even beneath all the noise, love endures in the quiet hum of things that never stop moving. Because in New York, the trains keep running, and somewhere on Line 3, love still rides.